There's a photograph of Odette Sansom from 1946, taken shortly after her liberation from Ravensbrück concentration camp. She's wearing a simple dress, her hair carefully styled, her face composed. She looks like any middle-class British housewife. The photograph does show what's hidden beneath that dress, the scars across her back where a red-hot poker burned her spine. It doesn't show her feet, where several toenails never grew back properly, and it certainly doesn't capture what it cost her to sit still for that photograph, pretending to be whole. She was 33 years old when she made the most impossible choice a mother can make. She had 3 daughters, Francoise Lily and Marianne, aged 11, 8, and 4. She was living in Somerset, England, married to an Englishman named Roy Sansom, trying to adapt to British life after growing up in France. She was partially blind in one eye. She had no military training, no espionage experience, no particular skills that would make her useful in wartime. She was exactly the kind of person intelligence agencies overlook, but she spoke perfect French, and in 1942, that made her invaluable. The call came through the War Office, though it wasn't exactly a call, more of a bureaucratic accident. Odette had written to the Admiralty offering to help with anything related to France, perhaps translation work or similar administrative tasks. Someone passed her letter to the wrong department. Or maybe it was the right department. The Special Operations Executive Churchill's secret army of saboteurs and spies was desperately recruiting French speakers to parachute back into occupied France and organize resistance networks. They wanted men, preferably, but they needed bodies more than they needed gender preferences. What the recruiters saw was a French native with British ties, someone who could move through occupied France without the telltale accent mistakes that got agents killed. What they didn't particularly care about was that she was a mother. What they certainly didn't anticipate was that this housewife with poor eyesight would become one of the most celebrated and late, one of the most forgotten heroes of the Second World War. Let's be clear about what they asked her to do. They wanted her to leave her 3 young daughters, lie to them about where she was going, parachute into Nazi-occupied France, live under false identity, help coordinate resistance attacks against German forces, and accept that she would probably be captured, tortured, and killed. The average life expectancy for SOE agents in France was approximately 6 weeks. She said yes. The question that haunts anyone who studies Odette Sansom's story is whether she was brave. Of course she was brave. The question is whether she was right. Can a mother abandon her children to fight for an abstraction like freedom or defeating fascism? Her daughters didn't understand where their mother went. How could they? She couldn't tell them. 4-year-old Marianne asked when Mummy was coming home. There was no good answer. Odette left them with family and went to Scotland for training. The SOE's assessment of her was lukewarm at best. Her instructors noted that she was not overly intelligent, lacking in imagination, and too emotionally volatile for covert work. They questioned whether she had the mental fortitude for the stress of living undercover. One evaluation literally stated she was temperamentally unsuitable for this work. They sent her to France anyway. They needed French speakers that badly. She parachuted into unoccupied southern France in November 1942, just weeks before the Germans would violate the armistice and occupy the entire country. Her cover story was simple. She was Odette Métayer, a widow looking for work. Her mission was to serve as a courier for a resistance circuit called Spindle, run by a fellow SOE agent named Peter Churchill. No relation to Winston Churchill, though that detail would later become the most important lie of her life. Peter Churchill was everything the SOE wanted in Agent Cambridge: educated, confident, experienced. Odette was the auxiliary, the support staff, the woman who carried messages and maintained safe houses. That was the plan, at least. Within months, Peter Churchill came to depend on her completely. She had something the training instructors had failed to recognize: an absolute inability to panic. When a contact failed to appear, she didn't freeze or run. When a Gestapo checkpoint appeared unexpectedly, she walked through it with the bored expression of a woman coming home from the market. When the entire circuit nearly collapsed due to a betrayed agent, she calmly reorganized the safe houses and communication networks. The temperamentally unsuitable housewife turned out to have ice water in her veins. She and Peter Churchill became lovers. This violated every operational security protocol the SOE had established. Mixing romance with espionage creates vulnerabilities, compromises judgment, generates jealousies within networks. Intelligence historians still debate whether their relationship made them stronger or more reckless. What's undeniable is that when the trap closed around them, they faced it together. The betrayal came from within, it almost always does. A French agent working for Spindle was actually a double agent feeding information to the a German military intelligence. In April 1943, barely 5 months into her mission, Odette and Peter were arrested at a hotel in the French Alps. The Gestapo knew exactly who they were looking for. They'd been watching the hotel for days. Here's what happened in the moments after their arrest, according to Odette's later testimony. Peter Churchill immediately claimed to be the circuit organizer. This was true. What happened next was not standard procedure, not what the SOE taught, and not what anyone expected from a temperamentally unsuitable housewife. Odette claimed she was the leader. She insisted that Peter was merely following her orders. She told the Gestapo that she was the important one, the one with connections to London, the one worth interrogating. She was lying, of course, but the lie served two purposes. First, it redirected the Gestapo's attention away from Peter and the larger network. Second, it bought her leverage for the strategy. She was already formulating the strategy that would keep her alive through 14 months of torture. She told them her name was Odette Churchill, Peter's wife, and more importantly, she claimed Peter was Winston Churchill's nephew, the Prime Minister's family, operating in France, organizing the resistance. This was completely false. Peter Churchill had no relation to Winston Churchill whatsoever. The shared surname was pure coincidence. But Odette understood something crucial about the Nazi command structure. They were terrified of making mistakes that would embarrass the Reich, killing Churchill's relative without approval from Berlin, without extracting every possible piece of intelligence value, without considering potential prisoner exchanges. That was the kind of initiative that got German officers reassigned to the Eastern Front. The Gestapo bought it. More accurately, they couldn't risk not buying it. They transported her to Friends prison outside Paris, a facility the Gestapo used for special prisoners requiring enhanced interrogation. The methods used at Friends were not designed to be survived. They were designed to break human beings into compliant sources of information within hours or days. The Gestapo had refined these techniques across occupied Europe. They knew exactly how much pain a human body could endure before the mind surrendered. They started with her fingernails. Not all of them at first, just enough to demonstrate what was coming. They used pliers, tearing the nails from the nail bed slowly enough to maximize the nerve damage. The pain, according to medical experts who later examined survivors of similar torture, is extraordinary. The human fingertips contain more nerve endings per square inch than almost anywhere else on the body. Ripping nails out is just painful, it says, designed to make the victim feel like their body is being destroyed from the extremities inward. She didn't talk. They moved to her toenails. Same procedure. Same excruciating methodology. They wanted names of other agents, locations of safe houses, radio frequencies, drop zones. They wanted the entire spindle network exposed so they could roll up every operation in southern France. She gave them nothing. Let's pause here and consider what giving them nothing actually meant. This wasn't stoic silence in the face of questioning. This was maintaining a coherent cover story while experiencing pain specifically designed to make coherent thought impossible. She had to remember her lies. She had to keep Peter's fabricated connection to Churchill consistent. She had to protect the network without revealing she was protecting it. And she had to do all of this while her body was being systematically mutilated. The psychological dimension of this torture is often overlooked. The Gestapo interrogators would stop periodically, give her time to think, let the pain settle into a constant scream from her damaged nerves. They'd offer water, medical attention, an end to the suffering. All she had to do was talk. Just a few names, just a few addresses. They'd bring her photographs of her daughters, a reminder she had children waiting for her in England. Wouldn't she like to see them again? 4-year-old Marianne, who'd asked when Mummy was coming home. She didn't talk. When the fingernail and toenail torture failed to break her, they escalated. They heated a poker in a coal fire until it glowed red hot and pressed it repeatedly against her spine. The scars would be visible for the rest of her life, raised discolored tissue where the iron burned through skin and into the muscle beneath. The purpose wasn't information extraction at this point. This was punishment. This was the Gestapo demonstrating what happened to people who defied them. She still didn't talk. After several weeks of interrogation at Friends, the Gestapo tried a different approach. They placed her in solitary confinement in complete darkness. Not dim like absolute darkness. They kept her there for months. Sensory deprivation is its own form of torture. The human mind begins to hallucinate. Time becomes meaningless. The prisoner loses the ability to distinguish between waking and sleeping. Some prisoners in extended darkness experience psychotic breaks from which they never recover. Odette later described the darkness as almost peaceful compared to the torture sessions. At least in the darkness, no one was hurting her. She could think, could remember her daughter's faces. She could plan how to survive the next interrogation. But here's what the Gestapo didn't understand. Odette had already made her decision. She'd made it the moment she left her daughters in England. She'd chosen the mission over them once, and that choice had been so enormous, so morally devastating, that everything afterward was simply an extension of that original decision. If she'd abandoned her children to fight the Nazis, she certainly wasn't going to betray the network. Now the cost had been too high. The sacrifice had to mean something. The interrogations continued periodically over 14 months. Different interrogators, different techniques, but always the same questions and always the same answer. Nothing. Or rather, the same lie. She was Churchill's relative. She was the network leader. Peter was following her orders. She knew only what she'd already told them, which was carefully calculated misinformation. The Gestapo kept her alive because of the Churchill connection. They filed reports with Berlin. They waited for instructions about whether to use her for a prisoner exchange, for propaganda, for leverage in negotiations. The bureaucratic machinery of the Reich actually protected her from execution. The lie was working. In July 1944, as the Allies advanced through France after D-Day, The Gestapo transferred Odette to Ravensbrück concentration camp in Germany. This was not a promotion in her circumstances. Ravensbrook was where the Reich sent women they wanted to disappear. It was a death camp, though not an extermination camp in the industrial sense of Auschwitz or Treblinka. Ravensbrück killed through labor, starvation, medical experimentation, and casual execution. Odette was classified as a not honorable prisoner night and fog. This was a special designation for political prisoners. The Nazis wanted to vanish without a trace. No brackets, no notifications to families, no paper trail. Just disappearance into the darkness. They placed her in a punishment cell next to the crematorium. She could hear the screams of women being executed. She could smell the smoke from the bodies being burned. The psychological torture was now augmented by the constant reminder of what awaited her. But something had changed. The war was turning. The guards at Ravensbrück were increasingly nervous. The administrative staff started burning records. Transports of prisoners east to other camps became more frequent as the SS tried to hide evidence of their crimes before the advancing Allies arrived. And Odette was still claiming to be Churchill's niece. The camp commandant, Fritz Suren, was a career SS officer who understood that the war was probably lost. He also understood that how he behaved in the final months might determine whether he faced a firing squad after German defeat. Having Churchill's relative in his camp was suddenly not a propaganda asset, it was a potential life insurance policy. He moved Odette to better accommodations. Not comfortable, not remotely humane by any normal standard, but better than the death cell next to the crematorium. He made sure she received slightly more food. He stopped the torture. In April 1945, as Soviet forces approached Ravensbrück from the east and American forces from the west, chaos consumed the camp. The SS began evacuating prisoners on death marches, attempting to move evidence of their crimes away from the advancing armies. Thousands of women were force-marched out of Ravensbrück in the final weeks. Most didn't survive the journey. Suren kept Odette behind. In the final days before the camp's liberation, he made an extraordinary decision. He personally drove Odette to the American lines and handed her over to US forces. He asked her to testify on his behalf when the war crimes trials began. She agreed. And she did testify that Suren had protected her at the end, that he'd stopped the torture, that he'd ensured her survival. Her testimony didn't save him. He was executed in 1954, his role in the deaths of thousands of women at Ravensbrück. But Odette kept her word and spoke for him anyway, because she learned something in those 14 months. Survival requires moral compromises that couldn't be explained to people who were there. When Odette returned to England in May 1945, she weighed barely 90 pounds. Her back was scarred. Her feet were permanently damaged. She had nightmares that would continue for decades. And she came home to daughters who barely remembered her. Marianne was now 7. The mother who'd left was a stranger. Britain celebrated her as a hero. King George VI awarded her the George Cross in 1946, the highest civilian decoration for gallantry, equivalent of the Victoria Cross for military personnel. She was the first woman to receive it while still alive. The citation described her courage, endurance, and self-sacrifice of the highest possible order. The newspapers loved her. She was photogenic, well-spoken, and her story had everything: motherhood, sacrifice, torture, survival. She was interviewed extensively. A book was published. In 1950, a major film called Odette, starring Anna Nigel, told her story to packed cinemas across Britain, and then something curious happened. The celebrity faded. The interviews stopped. The public moved on to other stories, other heroes, other wars. Odette divorced Roy Sansom and married Peter Churchill in 1947. The marriage lasted 9 years before ending in divorce. The love that survived Gestapo torture couldn't survive peacetime domesticity. There is a painful irony in that two people who faced death together couldn't figure out how to live together. She married again in 1956, this time to Jeffrey Hallis, another former SO agent. This marriage lasted until his death in 1986. They lived quietly. She rarely gave interviews. She attended commemorative events for SO veterans, but she wasn't comfortable with the label hero. In her later years, when journalists did occasionally track her down, Odette was notably reluctant to discuss the torture. She didn't want to be defined by what had been done to her. She wanted to be remembered for what she'd chosen to leave her daughters and fight fascism. But torture was just what happened afterward. She was also remarkably ambivalent about the moral dimensions of her choices. When asked in a 1980s interview whether she regretted leaving her daughters, she paused for a long time before answering. She said she'd done what needed to be done. She didn't say she'd made the right choice, she said it needed to be done. That distinction matters. Here's what intelligence historians have debated about Odette Sansom for decades. Was she actually an effective agent, or was she simply incredibly lucky to survive? Her operational record was brief: 5 months before capture. She didn't personally organize major sabotage operations. She didn't kill German officers or blow up rail lines. She was a courier, support staff, and then a prisoner. But she protected the network. Under torture specifically designed to break human beings, she gave the Gestapo nothing of value. Other agents they arrested alongside Spindle members talked within days. Some talked within hours. The information they provided allowed the Germans to arrest more agents, compromise more circuits, and severely damage so operations in southern France. Odette's silence bought time. It bought confusion. It protected people whose names she knew, whose faces she'd seen, whose families would have been arrested if she'd talked. That silence, maintained through methods designed to make silence impossible, was her operational contribution. Was she heroic or lucky? The answer is probably both, and that's not a comfortable answer. She was heroic in choosing to resist torture when talking would have ended the pain. She was lucky that her lie about Churchill was believed. She was heroic in maintaining that lie under conditions that destroyed most people's ability to maintain any coherent story. She was lucky that Søren decided to use her as his insurance policy rather than execute her in the final days. Heroism and luck are not mutually exclusive. Most survivors of extraordinary circumstances needed both. The George Cross she received recognized her courage, but it also served a propaganda purpose for Britain. The government needed heroes in 1946. They needed stories that made the war seem worthwhile, that justified the sacrifices, that demonstrated British resilience. Odette's story was perfect: a mother who left her children, suffered horribly, never broke, and survived to return home. It was almost too perfect, but the torture was real. The scars were real. The 14 months in darkness were real. These were not propaganda fabrications. They were things that actually happened to a 33-year-old woman who'd been a housewife in Somerset. What's most striking about Odette Sansom's story is how thoroughly she was forgotten after the initial celebrity faded. The 1950 film Odette is rarely shown now. Her name doesn't appear in most general histories of World War II. Ask a random British citizen about Saw heroines and they're far more likely to name Violette Chabot or Nancy Wake, other women whose stories were also tragic, also heroic, also largely forgotten by mainstream culture. Why do we forget people like Odette Sansom? Part of it's the sheer volume of wartime suffering. There were so many heroes, so many survivors, so many stories that we can't possibly hold them all in cultural memory. Part of it is that her story doesn't fit comfortable narratives. She abandoned her children. She violated operational security by having an affair with Peter Churchill. She survived partly through a strategic lie that happened to be believed. These are complex, morally ambiguous elements that don't translate into simple good versus evil storytelling. And part of it is that she was a woman. So male agents who survived similar ordeals received greater long-term recognition, more comprehensive biographies, more sustained historical attention. The pattern is consistent enough that it can't be coincidental. Odette Sansom died in 1995 at the age of 83. Her obituaries in British newspapers were respectful but brief. The Times gave her 5 paragraphs. The Guardian included her in a roundup of notable deaths that week. She was buried with full military honors, her George Cross displayed on her coffin. Her 3 daughters attended the funeral, Francoise, Lily, and Marianne, now elderly women themselves, burying the mother who left them in 1942. Did they understand why she'd gone? Did they forgive her? The historical record doesn't tell us. Some questions don't have public answers. What we can examine is what Odette Sansom's story reveals about intelligence work and about the people we asked to do it. The SO recruiters were wrong about her. The training instructors who deemed her temperamentally unsuitable completely misjudged her capacity for endurance under pressure. They were looking for traditionally masculine qualities: aggressiveness, physical strength, combat skills. They missed what actually mattered in her role: the ability to maintain a lie while experiencing pain designed to make lying impossible. They also missed something crucial about motherhood. Odette didn't survive despite being a mother. She survived partly because she was a mother. She'd already made the most devastating choice a parent can make. She'd already placed duty above the most primal human bond. Everything the Gestapo did to her afterward, as horrible as it was, couldn't surpass the magnitude of that original decision. They were trying to break someone who'd already broken herself for the mission. There's a document in the British National Archives, declassified in the 1990s, that contains the Gestapo's final assessment of Odette Churchill as they knew her. It's a brief administrative note from Friends prison to Ravensbrook transferring custody. The notation in German translates roughly to, "Prisoner refuses all cooperation despite intensive interrogation. Recommend continued special handling due to claimed Churchill connection. Subject demonstrates unusual psychological resistance." Unusual psychological resistance. That is what the Gestapo called it when a French housewife with no military training and poor eyesight refused to break after 14 months of torture. The SO called it temperamentally unsuitable for covert work. Her daughters called her mother, though they barely knew her. Britain called her a George Cross recipient for 3 years, then mostly forgot about her. History, when it remembers her at all, calls her a hero. None of these labels fully capture Odette Sansom. They're all true and all insufficient. She was a woman who made an impossible choice, survived impossible circumstances, and then had to live with both for the rest of her life. The question that remains, the one that makes her story so profoundly uncomfortable, is whether she made the right choice. Should a mother leave 3 young daughters to fight in a war? The easy answer is that fighting fascism was necessary, that someone had to do it, that her contribution mattered. But her daughters didn't think it was necessary. They needed their mother. 4-year-old Mary Ann didn't understand fascism. She understood that her mother was gone. Odette never resolved this tension, at least not publicly. In her few later interviews, she acknowledged the cost. She acknowledged what she'd asked her daughters to sacrifice. She didn't claim it was worth it. She didn't claim it wasn't. She simply said it had been necessary. Maybe that's the most honest answer anyone can give. She saw a choice between her children and defeating Hitler, and she chose defeating Hitler. She lived with that choice for 50 years, through celebrity and obscurity, through marriages and divorces, through nightmares and commemorations. The scars on her back never fully healed. The nightmares never fully stopped. The toenails never properly grew back. These were permanent reminders of what 14 months in Gestapo custody had cost her physically. But the real cost, the one she carried every day, was the look on her daughters' faces when she came home in 1945 and they did quite recognize her. That's the price of being a forgotten hero. You give everything, you survive what shouldn't be survived. You protect the network and maintain the lie and endure the torture. And then you come home to children who grew up without you, and you realize that some things can't be recovered. Some costs can't be repaid. Some sacrifices can't be unmade. Odette Sansom was too French, too female, too much a mother to be taken seriously by the intelligence professionals who trained her. She was dismissed, underestimated, and deemed temperamentally unsuitable. She was also tougher than the Gestapo, more strategic than her trainers, and more committed to the mission than anyone expected. Her George Cross sits in the Imperial War Museum in London. Her name appears on memorials to SO agents. Her story is occasionally retold when someone wants to write about brave women in wartime, but mostly, she's forgotten. Just another hero we celebrated briefly and then moved on from, because there were so many heroes and we can't remember them all. Maybe that's fitting. Odette Sansom didn't want to be remembered for the torture. She wanted to be remembered for choosing to go, for leaving her daughters and fighting back, for being the ordinary housewife who turned out to be extraordinary when it mattered most. The woman too unlikely to succeed who survived what no one should survive. The mother who left her children and never quite came home. The forgotten hero who refused to be broken, even when breaking would have been so much easier than enduring. Her name was Odette Sansom, and this was her story.